The Galactic Military Academy on Zephyr Station had seen many species pass through its halls over the centuries. Vorthak warriors with their razor-sharp claws, Maclonian intellectuals with their 3 brains, and even the occasional gas-breathing Nephilim who required special atmospheric suits. But humans? Well, they were still the new kids on the block, and, frankly, most of us thought they were a joke. I should introduce myself. Commander Thrix Valorian of the 3rd Hegemony Fleet, currently assigned as a tactical instructor at this so-called prestigious academy. My species, the Kanthari, had been part of the galactic community for over 4,000 years. We were logical, methodical, and above all, civilized. Unlike these pink-skinned mammals who had barely figured out faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. The morning started like any other boring rotation cycle. I was reviewing combat scenarios in my office when the alarm chimed, indicating another disciplinary incident in the training wing. 3rd one this week. Apparently, some of the senior cadets from various species had been having integration issues with the newer human recruits. Integration issues, I muttered to myself, clicking my mandibles in annoyance. More like systematic bullying, but who am I to judge? The Academy's political correctness protocols prevented us from calling it what it really was. After all, we couldn't admit that several supposedly advanced species were picking on the galaxy's newest members like schoolchildren. I made my way through the sterile corridors of the Academy, past holographic displays showing famous battles and legendary commanders. The human section was notably absent from these displays. Hard to have legends when you've only been spacefaring for half a century. The training wing buzzed with activity as always. Cadets from dozens of species practiced combat maneuvers, studied stellar navigation, and participated in what the Academy generously called character-building exercises. I spotted the commotion near Training Base 7, where a crowd had gathered. "Move along," I commanded, my voice carrying the authority that came with having survived 3 interstellar wars. Nothing to see here. The crowd dispersed reluctantly, revealing the source of today's entertainment. A human cadet sat on the floor, cradling his left hand against his chest. His face was pale, which I had learned indicated pain or distress in his species. Around him stood 3 cadets I recognized immediately. Brutus Hammerfist, a Goliathan whose species resembled walking mountains. Venix Striketalon, a Raptorian with natural weapons that could slice through steel, and their leader, Captain Korath Bloodspine of the Ursinian Combat Corps. "Well, well," I said, approaching the group. "Captain Bloodspine, care to explain why cadet?" I glanced at the human's uniform tag. "Marcus Stone is sitting on my training floor? Korath Bloodspine was everything you'd expect from an Ursinian officer. 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor plating, with tusks that could punch through a battleship's hull. His species had a reputation for being honorable warriors, though recent evidence suggested that honor was becoming increasingly flexible. "Simple training accident, Commander Valorian," Korath replied, his voice like grinding stone. "The human cadet failed to properly execute a defensive maneuver. His finger got caught in Brutus's grip during the exercise." I looked at Marcus Stone more carefully. The human was young, maybe 22 in Earth years, with the kind of determined expression that spoke of someone who refused to quit, despite being outmatched. His finger was clearly broken, bent at an angle that made even my hardened military sensibilities wince. "Is that your version of events, Cadet Stone?" I asked. Marcus looked up at me with eyes that held more fire than fear. "Sir, I was demonstrating the standard deflection technique when Captain Bloodspine ordered his squad to use full force. When I attempted to comply with the modified parameters, Cadet Hammerfist applied what I would estimate to be approximately 3 times the necessary pressure to achieve a teaching demonstration. Smart mouth on this one. I liked that. Most species would have whimpering by now. You see, Commander? Korath interjected. The human admits he couldn't handle standard training pressure. Perhaps their species isn't cut out for real military service. Standard training pressure? I clicked my mandibles again, a sound that usually made junior officers nervous. Since when is breaking bones considered standard in training exercises? Since we started accepting weaklings into the academy, Venix Striketalon hissed, his razor-sharp beak clicking with what his species considered amusement. Maybe the humans should stick to their little corner of the galaxy, playing with their primitive technology. I noticed Marcus's jaw tighten at that comment. Interesting. Humans were supposedly emotional creatures, driven by irrationality and impulse. Yet this one was maintaining remarkable composure for someone whose finger was pointing in the wrong direction. Medical team to Training Bay 7, I called into my communicator. We have an injured cadet requiring immediate attention. That's really not necessary, sir, Marcus said, slowly getting to his feet. I can make it to the medical wing on my own. Nonsense. Academy protocol requires medical evaluation for all training injuries. I studied his face carefully. Though I suppose you could file a formal complaint about the circumstances. Might be worth investigating whether proper safety protocols were followed. The temperature in the training bay seemed to drop several degrees. Korath Bloodspine's armor plates shifted, a sign of agitation in his species. Commander Valorian, he said, his voice carrying a warning tone, I hope you're not suggesting that my training methods are somehow inappropriate. My record speaks for itself. Oh, I'm well aware of your record, Captain. I pulled up his file on my wrist display with exaggerated slowness. 17 disciplinary incidents in the past year alone. 12 complaints of excessive force. And now, a broken human finger to add to your collection. Accidents happen in training, Brutus rumbled, his mountain-like form shifting impatiently. The human should have been stronger. Should have been stronger? I laughed, a sound that made several nearby cadets take nervous steps backward. Fascinating philosophy. Tell me, Brutus, what's your species' average grip strength? 8,000 pounds per square inch, he answered proudly. And humans? Silence. I'll help you with the math. Approximately 160 pounds per square inch. So when you applied your standard grip, you were using roughly 50 times the force his species can naturally generate. I turned to Korath. But please, continue explaining how this was a fair training exercise. The medical team arrived, led by Dr. Helix Mindweaver, a cerebral whose species specialized in biological sciences. She immediately began scanning Marcus with her portable diagnostic equipment. Compound fracture of the index finger, she reported. Clean break, but will require surgical repair and regeneration therapy. The cadet will be out of active training for at least 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Korath scoffed. For a finger? My species would be back in action within hours. Your species also has natural bone density 3 times greater than humans, Dr. Mindweaver replied dryly, and redundant skeletal support systems, but I suppose comparative biology wasn't covered in your tactical training. I watched Marcus carefully as the medical team prepared to escort him to the infirmary. There was something in his expression, a calculating look, that made me think of a predator sizing up its prey. Humans were supposedly pack hunters back on their homeworld. Maybe some of those instincts were still buried in there. "Cadet Stone," I called as he reached the bay entrance. "Report to my office after your medical treatment. We need to discuss your training schedule modifications." He nodded once, sharply. "Yes, sir." After the medical team departed with Marcus, I turned back to Korath and his crew. They were already starting to disperse, probably thinking the entertainment was over. "Gentlemen," I said, using the term loosely, "I trust this was an isolated incident." "Of course, Commander," Korath replied smoothly, "though I do hope the human cadets will start taking their training more seriously. We can't be expected to hold back indefinitely just to accommodate weaker species." "Weaker species." I repeated the phrase slowly, letting it hang in the air like a bad smell. "You know, Captain, I've been thinking about organizing some special training exercises. Cross-species combat scenarios. Really test everyone's mettle against unfamiliar opponents." The three exchanged glances. Something about my tone must have worried them. "That sounds educational," Korath said carefully. "Oh, it will be. Very educational." I smiled, which in my species involves exposing several rows of sharp teeth. "I'll be sure to inform all the human cadets about your training philosophy. I'm sure they'll find it very motivating." As they left the training bay, I couldn't help but notice the way they walked. The swagger of bullies who believed themselves untouchable. The casual arrogance of species who had never encountered real consequences for their actions. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. I had been studying human military history as part of my preparation for teaching their cadets. Fascinating reading, really. A species that had spent most of its existence fighting itself had developed some truly creative approaches to warfare. They had terms like asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, and something called disproportionate response. But what really caught my attention were their psychological profiles. Humans, according to the academic literature, possessed something called persistence hunting instincts. They would pursue prey over vast distances, wearing it down through sheer determination rather than overwhelming force. They also had a curious trait the xenopsychologists called protective aggression. Apparently, harming a member of their group could trigger responses that were completely disproportionate to the original offense. I made my way back to my office, already formulating plans. The Academy's training protocols were about to become much more interesting. 3 hours later, Marcus Stone appeared at my office door. His left hand was encased in a medical regeneration cast, glowing softly with healing energy. But his posture was straighter than before, and his eyes held a cold determination that hadn't been there earlier. "Cadet Stone reporting as ordered, sir." "Come in, have a seat." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "How's the finger?" "Dr. Mindweaver says it will be fully functional within 10 days, sir. I can return to limited training activities within 48 hours. "Impressive. Human regeneration technology has certainly advanced rapidly." I leaned back in my chair, studying his face. "Tell me, Marcus, what's your assessment of today's incident?" He was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his words carefully. "Sir, I believe I was subjected to deliberate excessive force by senior cadets who view human participation in the Academy as inappropriate. The incident was designed to humiliate me and discourage other human cadets from pursuing advanced military training. Direct and to the point. I like this human more by the minute." "That's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence to support it?" "Only the circumstances themselves, sir. A Goliathan applying full grip, strength to a human finger during a basic defensive exercise isn't an accident. It's either gross negligence or deliberate assault." "And which do you believe it was?" His eyes hardened. "Deliberate, sir." I see. And what do you propose we do about it? Now came the interesting part. Would he demand justice through official channels? Would he request a transfer to avoid future conflicts? Or would he reveal something more human? I would like to request additional training time, sir. Specifically, I'd like access to the Advanced Combat Simulation Chambers and the Xenobiology database. I raised an eyebrow. Planning to learn how to fight Goliathans? Planning to learn how to fight everyone, sir. There it was, that predatory gleam I had noticed earlier. Humans, it seemed, didn't just get mad. They got educated. The simulation chambers are typically reserved for senior cadets. I understand, sir, but I believe I can demonstrate sufficient motivation to warrant an exception. Motivation? I clicked my mandibles thoughtfully. Tell me, Cadet Stone, what do you know about your species' military history? Quite a bit, sir. Why do you ask? Your people have a saying, don't they? Something about sleeping giants? His smile was sharp enough to cut steel. Yes, sir. Admiral Yamamoto said it after Pearl Harbor. I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve. Exactly. I pulled up the training schedule on my display. Simulation Chamber 3 is available from 0600 to 0800 each morning. I'll authorize your access, along with full xenobiology database privileges. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. I'm also assigning you to the Advanced Tactical Analysis program. You'll be studying combat scenarios involving asymmetric warfare, specifically cases where smaller forces defeated larger, more powerful opponents. His eyes lit up with genuine interest. That sounds fascinating, sir. Oh, it will be, especially the section on human military innovations. Your species has developed some remarkably creative solutions to being outgunned and outmatched. I stood up, signaling the end of our meeting. One more thing, Cadet Stone. The Academy will be hosting a series of interspecies combat tournaments next month. Mixed martial arts, tactical simulations, that sort of thing. I think you should consider participating. Against opponents like Captain Bloodspine? Among others, yes. I'd be honored, sir. As he left my office, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. The next few weeks were going to be very interesting indeed. That evening, I made a call to an old friend in the Intelligence Corps. Thrix. Commander Nexus Void Hunter's image appeared on my communication screen. It's been too long. What can I do for you? I need a favor. I want you to send me everything you have on human military tactics and psychology. Everything. Everything. That's going to be a lot of data. Any particular reason? Let's just say I have a feeling we've been underestimating our newest galactic neighbors. Underestimating humans? Most of the command structure thinks they're barely above primitive. Most of the command structure hasn't been paying attention. I thought about Marcus Stone's expression when he left my office. Trust me on this one. Send me everything. You got it. But Thrix, if you're planning something, be careful. The political situation with human integration is still delicate. Don't worry about the politics. Just send me the files. After ending the call, I sat back in my chair and contemplated the events of the day. Korath Bloodspine and his followers thought they had put the humans in their place. They believed they had demonstrated the natural order of things in the galaxy. They had no idea they had just made the biggest mistake of their military careers. Over the next week, I watched with professional interest as word of Marcus Stone's injury spread through the Academy. The reaction from the human cadets was illuminating. They didn't protest. They didn't file complaints. They didn't demand justice through official channels. Instead, they started training. Every morning, I saw small groups of human cadets making their way to the simulation chambers. They studied together, trained together, and began developing their own tactical doctrines. They were quiet about it, almost secretive, but I could see the signs. The humans were preparing for war. Marcus himself had become something of a focal point. His broken finger had become a symbol, a reminder of what happened when you underestimated the opposition. But instead of inspiring fear, it seemed to have inspired something much more dangerous. It had inspired adaptation. I received the intelligence files from Nexus 3 days later. The data package was enormous, containing everything from ancient human warfare to their most recent military innovations. I spent hours reading through it, and what I found was both fascinating and terrifying. Humans, it seemed, had a remarkable talent for taking disadvantages and turning them into strengths. Outgunned? They developed better tactics. Outmanned? They built better weapons. Facing extinction? They fought harder. But most importantly, they learned. Every defeat taught them something new. Every loss made them stronger. It was a level of adaptive capacity that most species simply didn't possess. And now, thanks to Korath Bloodspine's training exercise, they were learning about us. 2 weeks after the finger incident, the Academy's atmosphere had shifted in ways that most instructors failed to notice. But I wasn't most instructors. I had been watching, cataloging, and frankly becoming more impressed with each passing day. The human cadets had transformed their approach entirely. Gone was the eager-to-please attitude they had arrived with. Instead, they moved through the corridors with the quiet confidence of apex predators who had finally remembered what they were. Marcus Stone's regeneration cast came off on schedule. His finger was fully functional, stronger than before thanks to the medical technology, but the real transformation wasn't physical. "Commander Valorian," he said, appearing at my office door for our scheduled progress review. "You wanted to see me?" "Indeed. How are you feeling about the upcoming tournament?" "Confident, sir." That single word carried enough weight to sink a battleship. I pulled up the tournament brackets on my display. "You've been assigned to face Cadet Slex Ironhide in the preliminary rounds. 9th generation Armadillo-class warrior. Natural armor plating, toxic spines, crushing jaw strength that can snap titanium. I'm aware of his capabilities, sir." "And you're still confident?" "More than confident, sir. I'm grateful." That stopped me cold. Grateful? Captain Bloodspine and his friends taught me something valuable about galactic military philosophy. They believe that superior physical attributes automatically translate to combat superiority. His smile was absolutely terrifying. They're about to learn why that assumption has historically been problematic. I leaned forward. "Explain." "My species spent 200,000 years as persistence hunters, sir. We didn't chase down mammoths and saber-toothed cats because we were stronger or faster. We did it because we were smarter, more adaptable, and utterly relentless." He paused. "Every species in this academy assumes their natural advantages make them unbeatable. But they've never faced an opponent who specializes in turning advantages into weaknesses. And how exactly do you plan to defeat an opponent who can literally crush you with his bare hands?" "By making sure his bare hands never get the chance, sir." The tournament began 3 days later in the Academy's main arena. The structure could hold 10,000 spectators, and for this event, every seat was filled. Representatives from across the galaxy had come to watch their species' finest young warriors compete. The human section was notably smaller than the others, but what they lacked in numbers, they made up for in intensity. They sat together, watching every match with the focus of scientists studying lab specimens. I found myself in the instructor's viewing box alongside other senior staff, including Captain Korath Bloodspine, who had been granted special permission to observe since several of his students were competing. "This should be entertaining," he rumbled as the first matches began. "I'm particularly interested in seeing how the humans perform against real opposition." The early rounds were predictable enough. Goliathan cadets demolished their opponents through brute force. Raptorian fighters used speed and natural weapons to slice through defenses. Maclonian contestants employed superior intellect to outmaneuver their adversaries. Then, Marcus Stone stepped into the arena. His opponent, Slex Ironhide, was everything I had described and more. 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor that could deflect energy weapons, with retractable spines that dripped paralytic toxins. He had won his previous matches by simply walking through his opponent's attacks and crushing them. "This is going to be ugly," muttered Professor Quentin Starweaver, the Academy's xenobiology instructor. "That human is going to get torn apart." The match began with Slex charging forward, a standard tactic for his species. Overwhelming force, minimum strategy, maximum intimidation. Marcus didn't retreat. He didn't dodge. Instead, he did something that made every instructor in the viewing box lean forward. He smiled. As Slex closed the distance, Marcus suddenly dropped low and rolled to the side, but not away from his opponent. Instead, he rolled directly toward Slex's legs, coming up behind the armadillo warrior with movements so fluid they looked choreographed. Slex spun around, confused, but not particularly concerned. His species didn't have many natural predators, so the concept of being hunted was foreign to them. That was their first mistake. Marcus began to move in a pattern that was beautiful and terrifying to watch. He circled Slex at precisely the right distance, just outside the reach of those crushing arms, but close enough to force constant rotation. Every few seconds, he would dart in, land a precise strike at a joint or pressure point, then fade back before retaliation was possible. "What is he doing?" Korath demanded. "Those strikes can't possibly penetrate Slex's armor." "He's not trying to penetrate it," I realized. "He's mapping it." For 15 minutes, Marcus continued his pattern. Strike, retreat, circle, strike again. Slex became increasingly frustrated, his movements growing wilder and less controlled. Sweat began to pour down the armadillo warrior's face as he struggled to keep up with his opponent's constant motion. "He's exhausting him," Professor Starweaver breathed. "But that's impossible. Armadillo physiology has 3 times the endurance capacity of humans." "Under normal circumstances, yes," I agreed. But Slex isn't fighting under normal circumstances. He's fighting a persistence hunter. The turning point came when Slex, desperate and exhausted, attempted a wild charge that left him off balance. Marcus sidestepped with casual ease, then did something that made the entire arena fall silent. He grabbed one of Slex's extended spines. Using the armadillo warrior's own momentum against him, Marcus twisted and pulled with surgical precision. There was a wet cracking sound as the spine separated from Slex's back, followed by a roar of pain and shock. But Marcus wasn't finished. Before Slex could recover, the human drove the detached spine directly into the joint where his opponent's arm met his shoulder, the one weak point in the natural armor that 15 minutes of careful observation had revealed. Slex collapsed, paralyzed by his own toxin. The arena was absolutely silent for nearly 10 seconds. Then the human section exploded in cheers, while the rest of the spectators sat in stunned disbelief. Impossible, Korath whispered. That technique. Where did he learn that? From his species history, I replied. They call it using the enemy's strength against them. Ancient concept. Very effective. The matches continued, but the tone had shifted completely. Every human victory was achieved through similar methods: superior tactics, adaptive strategy, and the kind of ruthless efficiency that came from a species that had climbed to the top of their food chain through intelligence rather than raw power. By the end of the preliminary rounds, 12 humans had advanced to the semi-finals. 12 humans out of a starting field of 200 cadets from 47 different species. This is unacceptable, Korath snarled during the intermission. They're cheating somehow. No primitive species should be able to dominate like this. Primitive? I clicked my mandibles in amusement. Captain, I think you may need to reconsider your definitions. The semifinals featured increasingly desperate opponents trying to adapt to human tactics. They failed. The humans had spent 2 weeks studying every species, every fighting style, every weakness, and they exploited that knowledge with clinical precision. But it was the final match that truly demonstrated why you should never, ever provoke a persistence hunter. Marcus Stone faced off against Brutus Hammerfist, the same Goliathan who had crushed his finger 3 weeks earlier. The mountain-sized warrior entered the arena with his usual arrogance, flexing muscles that could bench-press a hover tank. "This time, human," Brutus rumbled loud enough for the entire arena to hear. "I won't hold back." Marcus looked up at his opponent with the same calculating expression I had seen in my office weeks ago. "Neither will I," he replied quietly. The match lasted exactly 97 seconds. Brutus charged forward with the kind of earth-shaking force that had won him dozens of previous victories. But Marcus was ready. Instead of retreating or trying to dodge, he ran directly toward the charging Goliathan. At the last possible moment, Marcus dropped into a slide that carried him directly between Brutus's massive legs. As he passed underneath, he drove both hands upward in strikes so precise they looked like surgical procedures. Brutus stumbled, his charge becoming a barely controlled fall as specific nerve clusters in his legs suddenly stopped responding properly. He crashed to the arena floor with enough force to crack the reinforced surface. But Marcus wasn't finished. Before Brutus could recover, the human was on his opponent's back, his hands moving in patterns that spoke of hours of study in xenobiology databases. Pressure points, nerve clusters, circulatory, restrictions, all targeted with the precision of a master surgeon. Within 30 seconds, Brutus was unconscious. Within 60 seconds, he was completely paralyzed. At 97 seconds, Marcus Stone stood up and walked away, leaving an 8-foot-tall Goliathan warrior lying motionless on the arena floor like a toppled statue. The silence this time lasted nearly a full minute. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer finally managed, his voice cracking slightly, "your tournament champion, Cadet Marcus Stone of Earth." The human section didn't just cheer. They roared with a sound that made every other species in the arena suddenly remember why their ancestors had developed concepts like dangerous predator. But the real shock came during the victory ceremony. As Marcus stood on the winner's platform, accepting his trophy from Academy Commandant General Vex Titanforge, he did something unexpected. He turned toward the instructor viewing box and looked directly at Captain Korath Bloodspine. "Thank you, Captain," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's acoustic systems, "for teaching me that superior physical attributes mean nothing against superior tactics." Korath's face went through several shades of color that I was fairly certain weren't natural for his species. "This isn't over, human," he snarled, loud enough for everyone to hear. Marcus's smile could have frozen plasma. You're absolutely right, Captain. It's not. The party in the human quarters that night was legendary. But I wasn't invited to that celebration. Instead, I found myself in my office, reviewing the tournament footage and trying to process what I had witnessed. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Come in. Marcus Stone entered, still wearing his tournament winner's medal. But his expression was serious, almost grim. Sir, I need to report a security concern. What kind of security concern? Captain Bloodspine and several of his associates have been making threats against human cadets. Nothing official, nothing recorded, but the intent is clear. I leaned back in my chair. What sort of threats? The kind that suggest they believe today's results were a fluke that needs to be corrected through unofficial means. And you're concerned about an escalation? No, sir, Marcus replied, and there was something in his voice that made my scales tingle with premonition. I'm informing you that escalation has already begun. Explain. Approximately 15 minutes ago, Captain Bloodspine cornered 3 human cadets in Training Bay 12. He informed them that their tournament success had made them targets, and that he intended to demonstrate proper galactic hierarchy through personal instruction. And I corrected his misunderstanding about human military doctrine. The temperature in my office seemed to drop several degrees. Corrected how? Captain Bloodspine is currently in the medical wing with what Dr. Mindweaver described as comprehensive spinal realignment. The damage is repairable, but he'll be unconscious for at least 72 hours. I stared at him. You broke his neck. I adjusted his attitude, sir. The neck breaking was merely a side effect. There's going to be an investigation, formal charges. You could be expelled from the academy. I'm aware of the potential consequences, sir, but I want you to understand something about human military philosophy. I'm listening. We have a saying, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Captain Bloodspine crossed a line when he threatened cadets under my protection. Under your protection? I'm the senior human cadet, sir. That makes their safety my responsibility. The casual way he said it, as if breaking the neck of a superior officer was simply a logical response to a tactical problem, was more terrifying than any threat could have been. Marcus, I said carefully, what exactly did they teach you in those simulation chambers? Everything I needed to know about galactic anatomy, sir. Turns out, most species have remarkably similar vulnerabilities once you understand the underlying biological principles. He reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a data pad. I've prepared a comprehensive report on optimal tactical approaches for human forces facing superior opponents. I thought you might find it interesting reading. I accepted the pad with hands that weren't entirely steady. The investigation will begin tomorrow, I warned him. I understand, sir, but I don't think it will be a problem. Why not? Because Captain Bloodspine won't be pressing charges. How can you be so certain? Marcus's smile was absolutely predatory. Because I recorded our entire conversation before I adjusted his spine. Turns out, he said some very interesting things about his plans for human cadets. Things that would be extremely embarrassing if they became part of an official investigation. I looked at the datapad in my hands, then back at the young human standing in my office with the casual confidence of someone who had just redefined the balance of power at the academy. Is there anything else you need to report, Cadet? Just one thing, sir. The human cadets would like to request expanded training privileges. We believe we can make significant contributions to the Academy's tactical development programs. I see. And if these expanded privileges were denied, then I suppose we would have to make do with our current resources, sir. Though I should mention that several of my fellow cadets have become quite interested in xenobiology studies recently. The implication hung in the air like a loaded weapon. "I'll see what I can do," I said finally. "Thank you, sir. I think you'll find that humans can be very valuable allies." After he left, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at the data pad he had given me. Finally, I activated it and began to read. The document was a masterpiece of tactical analysis, covering everything from basic anatomy to advanced psychological warfare. It was the work of someone who had spent weeks studying not just how to fight galactic species, but how to utterly dominate them. And it was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, reports began to filter in from across the Academy. Incidents of harassment against human cadets had dropped to zero. Several species that had previously been dismissive of human capabilities were suddenly showing remarkable respect for their newest classmates. Captain Korath Bloodspine, when he finally recovered, put in for an immediate transfer to a remote outpost on the Galactic Rim. He never spoke publicly about what had happened in Training Bay 12, but word spread anyway. The humans, it seemed, had learned their place in the galactic community, and that place was at the top of the food chain. 6 months later, I received a communication from Galactic Command. The humans had requested permission to establish their own military academy. Their application included detailed curricula, training protocols, and a rather impressive list of potential instructors. All of them former Galactic Military Academy cadets. All of them human. The application was approved within days. As I watched the final group of human cadets prepare for graduation, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since that morning when Marcus Stone's finger was broken in Training Bay 7. The galaxy had spent 50 years treating humanity as the newest, weakest member of the galactic community. We had assumed their primitive technology and recent spacefaring status made them junior partners at best. We had been catastrophically wrong. The truth was much simpler and infinitely more terrifying. Humans weren't the weakest species in the galaxy. They were the most dangerous. They just hadn't bothered to prove it until someone broke their finger and forced them to show their teeth. Now, as I prepare for retirement, I often wonder what would have happened if Korath Bloodspine had simply treated Marcus Stone with basic respect that day. Would the humans have continued their quiet integration into galactic society? Would they have remained content to learn our ways and follow our lead? I suspect we'll never know. What I do know is this. When you're dealing with persistence hunters, apex predators, who conquered their own world through intelligence and determination, you have exactly two choices. Treat them as equals from the beginning, or learn why their planet has no other sapient species left on it. The galaxy chose poorly, and 37 species are still dealing with the consequences.